Bueno, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a todos a este espacio, a esta serie de diálogos, Reimaginar lo humano. Y estoy muy contento hoy de recibirlos a todos ustedes y recibir a mi querida amiga Margaret Cullen, que es, antes que nada, es mi amiga. Así que es rico tener esta excusa para hablar con ella por una hora sobre un tema que a ella le apasiona mucho, que es la ecuanimidad, y que creo que vamos a poder aprender bastante en este tiempo. Margaret fue una de las primeras personas que se formó como instructora del programa de reducción del estrés basado en mindfulness hace ya unos 30 años con John Kabat-Zinn, y ha sido una pionera en la integración entre prácticas contemplativas, psicología y el desarrollo de programas seculares basados en mindfulness y en compasión. Ella fue una de las fundadoras del CCT, Compassion Cultivation Training Program, el entrenamiento en el cultivo de la compasión. Fue mi supervisora cuando me entrené para enseñar ese programa hace unos 8 años atrás. Y bueno, soy su compañero de crimen, su partner in crime, como dice ella, en el desarrollo del programa MBEB, Mindfulness Based Emotional Balance. Y bueno, hemos tenido un montón de aventuras en este tiempo, así que es un gusto compartir con ustedes a mi amiga Margaret. A quienes se vienen uniendo, hay interpretación en español. Yo voy a empezar a hablar en inglés con Margaret de aquí en adelante. Entonces, para acceder al diálogo en español, gracias a la traducción maravillosa siempre de mi querida María José Tobías, que va a estar interpretando a Margaret hoy, tienes que ir al símbolo que dice interpretación abajo y pinchar en el globo español. Y eso creo que es todo. Si tienes alguna pregunta, puedes comentar por el chat. Bueno, voy a empezar a hablar en inglés. Thank you, Em, for being here today. It's a pleasure to have this conversation / interview with you on equanimity. And I want to thank also all the people that signed up for this, and they sent so many good questions. So people that come to the meetings, they should know that I have your questions here that you leave in the when you sign up for these conversations. I take the questions, and that's how I prepare the interviews and the conversations with the people I invite. So thank you, Margaret, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Gonzalo. I'm really excited to be with all of you and to talk about something that I've been really interested in, especially lately and coincidentally with the situation in the world as we find it. So good morning and buenas tardes and buenas noches and welcome. So shall I start with just a very brief practice?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I would just say that before Gonzalo and I get into this conversation about equanimity, just to really let you all know that this is not something I'm speaking about from a place of having achieved any perfection. I'm very much a work in progress. I'm very interested. And generally, as many of you know, we teach what we need and what we're working on for ourselves. So in this very brief opening practice, I thought I would share with you a few of the many phrases that you can work with in formal meditation in the cultivation of equanimity. So we'll just settle the mind for a couple of minutes, and then I'll share a variety of phrases with you that you can just try on and see what it's like. Feel into these phrases and see what they evoke in you. Really just as a by way of introduction to equanimity. So let's begin by finding a way to settle the mind and body in relative stillness. I know many of you are meditators and you already have a posture. And finding a place in the body where you can comfortably anchor your attention. For many people, it's the breath. For some people, it may be the touch points in the body, making contact with the floor or the chair. Some people might choose sound or listening. So finding a field of sensation, whether it's the breath or hearing or feeling pressure and contact, and gently gathering your attention there. If you're focusing on the breath, I invite you to notice that moment between the out breath and the next in breath. If you can perceive and feel this moment, it is an effortless moment of equanimity, of equipoise, uncontrived, happening many times a minute. Between contraction and expansion, there is equipoise. And then feeling into these phrases. May I come to see the arising and passing of all of nature with equanimity and balance. May I accept things as they are. May I be undisturbed by the comings and goings of events. I will care for you, but cannot keep you from suffering. I wish you happiness, but cannot make your choices for you. May I rest in not knowing. May I bring compassion and equanimity to the events of the world.
Thank you, for the practice. Beautiful way to introduce us in this hour of conversation. Even just now, doing these 5-7 minutes of practice, some sense of spaciousness arise in experience. And actually, at the end of the practice, I remember a phrase that I don't remember who said this, but it struck me when I heard it, which is relax, nothing is under control. So I guess a part of equanimity would be letting go a little bit of our tendency to try to grasp and to control the natural course of events that are not under our control anyway. It's just an illusion.
Yes, I think that's a lot of equanimity, actually. Non-grasping is a very big part of it.
Mm. So let's dive in with that. So you've been reflecting on equanimity for quite a while now. You are an emotion regulation teacher. You are a compassion cultivation training teacher and a mindfulness teacher. Why, for the last few years, I think at least, you've been more intensely interested in equanimity? And what is equanimity for you?
I imagine I've been more interested because I need it. I think another reason actually is that I feel like it's a little bit of, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention because it's subtle, it's quiet, and it's not sexy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit amorphous. It's a little bit hard to pin down and understand. And that intrigued me a lot as well. And as you know, I think of the virtues that are primary, not only in Buddhism, but in all the major religions. Equanimity figures very importantly, but it's almost never taught or discussed. You know, it's kind of like a stepchild over here that people don't really pay as much attention to.
So, what's your understanding of what equanimity is at this moment, from all your Buddhist practice, from what you've learned from psychology and your own experience? How would you define it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's a little bit of a moving target um, because it has different aspects. And I think one of the challenges is that it doesn't always look the same in every circumstance.
Mm.
Um, and there are different dimensions, there are different ways we can define it from different angles and perspectives. So one angle is to think about, you know, where we started, non-grasping. Shinzen Young does a really good job of discussing equanimity as a central feature of mindfulness. And a lot of what he's looking at, I really agree with, which is this aspect of non-stickiness,
Mm.
where experiences arise, we have them fully and we don't get caught in them.
Mm.
He calls it uncaughtness, non-caughtness, unstickiness. I'm sorry, Maria Ho, I don't know how you're going to translate non-caughtness into Spanish.
Mm.
And, you know, in Buddhism, as you know, Gonzalo, a lot of things are defined by what they're not.
Mhm.
Non-attachment, the unborn, the unformed, you know, because it's so hard to define things by what they are.
Mm.
So that's one way to look at it, is by what it isn't.
Mm.
And just to say a little bit more about that, caughtness in the Buddhist sense can express itself with two different poles
Mm.
that aren't typically opposites, what we think of as opposites, but in terms of equanimity, they are. And one pole is actually identification with content, feeling ownership of experiences that arise in the mind and body as me or mine or I. And the other pole is suppression, avoidance, pushing down, that's actually an aspect of being caught because we're holding on to it and it's getting stuck in some way inside.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. So we can get caught by explicitly identifying with something and grasping at something, but also not seeing something can be also being caught by it. Like avoiding a certain experience is also getting, well, Pema Chodron speak about getting hooked also.
Yeah.
I guess
Yes.
close to the stickiness that Shinsen Yang mentions. So what's the relationship between this practice of non-grasping and love and compassion, which are, you said, more sexier in a way for people interested in the spiritual path? We are inclined to, yes, let's cultivate love or compassion because these are qualities of the heart that are very luminous and they bring so much joy and also relieve suffering. And so why love and compassion need equanimity?
Yeah. Yeah. So interestingly, I think a lot of the people on this call listening to our conversation have already done loving kindness and compassion practices. And you know that built into those is a form of equanimity practice. They're actually built into all the formal practices that we teach. They're not separate. So when we practice loving kindness and compassion for a loved one, a stranger, a challenging person, and for all beings, that's equanimity. That's another expression of equanimity. That is actually equanimity practice. So that's a practice of non-grasping, of non-attachment and non-aversion, rather than saying, a loved one, you're the one I'm sending compassion to, and a difficult person, no, not for you. We're practicing non-attachment and non-aversion and a kind of impartiality towards all of these categories. And in that way, we temper loving kindness and compassion with equanimity. And equanimity is the element that prevents loving kindness and compassion from going into the near enemies and far enemies.
Hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that? Which are the near
Yes,
and the far enemies?
yes. So for loving kindness, the near enemy is self-centered attachment. And there's huge confusion, I think, in the way we use the word love in
Mm.
our, especially with our close relationships. A lot of what we call love is actually attachment. And the kind of love that we're cultivating in these practices is really not the kind of love we have in our close relationships typically. because it is a love that is the same for our partners, our children, and the president, potentially, of the United States. That's a big stretch. And we definitely think that the love we feel for our family, our loved ones, is a very different kind of love. And it is, because there's a lot of attachment there. And equanimity, so attachment is the near enemy of love, self-centered attachment, and hatred, of course, is the far enemy. And hatred is typically what we feel towards politicians right now, towards outgroups. And it's equanimity that allows us to cultivate impartiality.
Well, that's a high expectation, to be able to love the president as much as you love your husband or your daughter. So, I mean, if you take this literally, it really sounds from the beginning something impossible, something superhuman. And I could even ask, why is it even useful to love someone like a close one, like someone that is difficult, as someone that I feel close to? What's the benefit of that?
Okay, I know you know the answer to that, but I will pretend you don't. Yeah, so I did, that was probably a bad example. And I think right now, for most of the people who are listening, the President of the United States in this moment is setting the bar impossibly high. So don't worry about that. That is a very high bar. It's possible, probably, Ram Dass, and there are some teachers, stories are told that they were able to do that, and I believe them. But I don't expect that from most of us regular humans. So first of all, let's lower the bar. Let's take that off the table. Let's lower the bar to, somebody you're in conflict with, somebody you have difficulty with. So naturally, we were talking before this started about humanization and dehumanization. One of the big issues in the world right now that is creating tremendous suffering for everyone is the fact that certain groups of people have been dehumanized by other groups of people. And this creates suffering not just for the victims, but for the perpetrators of the dehumanization. And I think our goal individually and collectively is to rehumanize and fully humanize one another. And that is the value of practicing impartiality with compassion and loving kindness, is to begin to look at the ways in which we dehumanize on a personal level really extends generally. And when we practice seeing that even this person who was rude to me, who broke my heart, who betrayed me, who disappointed me, forget the president, just someone easier. If I can see that just like me, they want to be happy, they don't want to suffer, that they're a human being, a full human being, then I can begin to extend that to all groups everywhere. And we together can begin to overcome the tendency to dehumanize.
So if we think about difficult, you're talking about this difficult subject, no? Someone that is in conflict with me, or something that does something that is against my values, for instance. or something that I dislike, the practice of equanimity would help me not to dehumanize that person and to treat them as a human being. Maybe I don't like him, but I'm not going to create more suffering by wanting them to to suffer more. You can understand that their actions come from a place of suffering. So I understand more or less what's happening with the difficult person, but what happens with a close person? And how does equanimity look like when we try to relate with equanimity with someone we love and have close?
Yes.
Does it mean to detach or to, how do you apply that to a loved one?
So, as I talked about in the beginning, there are different expressions of equanimity, and you may have had a flavor for that in the different phrases that I shared. So we can approach it from the idea of stickiness, of not getting caught in what I really love in Buddhism, we talk about the 8 winds of gain and loss and pleasure and pain and fame and disrepute, praise and blame. So we don't get caught in all of that non-stickiness. Talked about impartiality as another manifestation of equanimity or way to practice it. Another thing that came up in the phrases that is another direction into equanimity that I think is especially relevant with our close loved ones is untangling, getting unhooked from being overly attached to their suffering when we cannot do anything about it. So the phrase is understanding that I'm not in complete control of your happiness or unhappiness, that I can't choose for you, is a way of practicing equanimity with our loved ones that paradoxically allows us to be closer to them. Because we unhook from getting caught in our own distress around things we cannot fix for them. For me, this was especially, still is true for both my mother and my daughter. My mother is dead now, but when I first learned the equanimity phrases, it was a revelation for me. She was very, very depressed most of her life. And she truly wanted me to fix her depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to. And I loved her. And I couldn't do it. And I got so caught in that dilemma. When I first heard the phrase, I still love you, even though I can't fix you, I was free to love her in a whole different way. And that was equanimity with a loved one.
That's very powerful. And I think it's a fine line. At least for me, it's hard in myself to notice when I'm being equanimous and when I'm being distant or maybe cold. Like even the meaning of impartiality for many of us could sound like not involved, not committed.
Yes.
Especially in close relationships, sometimes if we don't feel some attachment from the other person, we don't feel loved. So it's
Yes.
a really fine line
Yes.
between love and attachment, and what does it mean to be equanimous without being detached but still be committed.
Yes. I think that is the biggest area of confusion. And we talked about near enemies. And of course, the near enemy of equanimity is indifference. And I've thought a lot and read a lot about this. So if you notice that you're retreating in any way into not caring, if the warmth goes away, if there's a coldness, that's not equanimity, that's indifference. And part of it has to do with the danger that we have in idealizing what these things look like and getting some fixed model of what an equanimous person looks like on the outside, you know, or even some idealized model about what it feels like on the inside. Those are two really big dangers that we so frequently get caught in misunderstanding. Like an equanimous person walks around not feeling anything, is never disturbed, is totally balanced, and that's not it at all. You know, and in fact, I just want to share, if I can find it readily, for you, because I have all these notes here, and I may not have it right here. I have a definition from, oh yeah, here we go. The Buddha, actually, who described a mind filled with equanimity. This is really interesting to me, as abundant, exalted. I mean, exalted is not indifferent, huh? It's such a different flavor than exalted. Immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Yeah, so I think in our effort often to put on a pose of equanimity, you know, making kind of these attempts to approximate it, it can end up being a detached state, which is the near enemy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it might take a lot of self-observation, of mindfulness, because it's a fine line and it can be very comfortable. I've seen it in others and I've seen it in myself when I feel that I'm being equanimous and I feel I'm detaching. And I think it's a bias that we can tend to people that are interested in the spiritual path. And there are some paths that are more kind of transcendent in a way, where we can think, okay, I'm above the messy stuff of emotions, but maybe I haven't even connected with the heart.
So I think another interesting test, and I think what's wonderful about Buddhism as a philosophy and a practice is that we're invited to see for ourselves what's true. So I think a really interesting test with equanimity is apply equanimity. Does your love flow more freely? If it does, if you feel more loving, that's equanimity. If you feel removed, that's indifference.
Yeah.
I think about it with my daughter too. You know, as a parent, I take, in some way, as parents, we take even more responsibility for the happiness of our loved ones than we do for our parents or our partners. We feel responsible. And if I bring in the complexity, which equanimity does, of all the causes and conditions that affect my daughter's happiness, if I open to the widest perspective, do I get detached from her, or does it free me to love her better, for my love to flow? Because it's not being hindered by my self-doubt, by trying to fix something I can't, take responsibility for what I can't control.
Yeah. And I'm not a father, but I know the experience of people that are parents, and I know that that's a fine line too. That's difficult to practice, and something that was asked by many people that sign up in this webinar. And actually, I want to say to the people that are listening is that I'm also reading some of the questions in the chat, and we may have some minutes even to take one or two questions from the public, if that's fine with you, Margaret. Excellent.
Yep.
So people were curious about what's the role of equanimity in what we're going through right now. Like, families are physically closer these days. Many families are spending way more time together than we used to do in normal times, non-pandemic times, and being a time that could be a good context for close intimacy. Many families are going through difficult times, through more conflict, more emotional turmoil. We're having to deal with more difficult sides of each other, spending more time together. So maybe from your own experience or your thoughts about this, what's how can we apply equanimity, or how can we practice equanimity in the midst of all these emotional upheavals of this time?
Well, first of all, that's certainly true in my household. And so going back to non-stickiness and not having idealized notions of what equanimity looks like. Equanimity does not mean that we don't feel pain
Mm.
as well as joy. We feel it fully. It does not mean that we don't uh, have fear and stress and anger and all of those things. And like with any contemplative or spiritual practice, I think what we really have to be most careful about is doing some kind of spiritual bypass where we try to impose an ideal of equanimity onto an already stressful circumstance and then feel inadequate
Mm.
because we're not equanimous enough.
Mm.
So in this case, I think equanimity means appreciating what's here.
Mm.
This is difficult.
Mm.
These are unusual times. We are living together in ways that may be bringing out the worst in us. It's hard.
Mm.
So equanimity opens to that, feels that. So the first step with equanimity is this is true.
Mm.
This is difficult. This is hard to be together as a family. And I think implicit in what you said, and certainly in my situation, is grief that we don't live a picture perfect family life, that there are fault lines
Mm.
that are getting revealed,
Mm.
that have always been there, but we can avoid them. But now we're in a pressure cooker together, and those past resentments and difficulties are heightened due to circumstances. We see them more in each other. And there's a gap between how we want to be and how we are, how we want our relationships with our families to be and how they actually are, how the people we love actually seem to us in this moment and how we want them to be. So acceptance first. First acceptance um, eliminates that gap between expectation and reality.
Mm.
That's equanimity first. And then we can bring in some of the perspective taking that is part of equanimity, which can help, which
Mm.
I've done at times over these last months of quarantining. And perspective taking and equanimity involves remembering impermanence. This is not how it's always going to be. This will change. It can be helpful to remember that. Not taking things personally is a very powerful equanimity reflection of, she's having a really bad day. I'm just going to avoid her today. And all these things, maybe they're not all about me. And then I'm immediately less caught. We can live together better because I'm going to just avoid her and let her be in her room today. And I'm not going to pursue her. And then there's the perspective from 5 years from now. Hopefully, this pandemic will be history. And can I imagine what it will look like in 5 years? So these are all kind of active equanimity reflections that can be brought in after acceptance. It's got to start with, this is how it is right now.
Yes, and that's a big difference, I think, because at first one can think to be equanimous is not to have anger.
Yeah.
But actually, equanimity is saying anger is here. And it's here. It's not all of my identity. It's what it is now. Fear is here. Pain is here. Grief is here. This too shall pass.
Yes.
I have no control of it, and I'm going to practice not to make a big deal out of it, and maybe I'm going to take the information that comes from it. But I think that's a key distinction that you made. It's not avoiding the emotional experience.
Yes, and I really want to emphasize that we all know what it feels like to be really upset and have someone say, "Oh, this too shall pass." That doesn't work. The acceptance has to happen first, the sitting with and feeling and letting that energy be known and experienced. Otherwise, it makes it worse, actually. Yeah.
So there might be something like premature equanimity. No?
Yeah, that's good.
So the way we have to be able to live the wave, which doesn't mean to act out necessarily the wave of anger or fear or whatever, but to feel it, to get in touch with it. So there are a few questions in the chat that I like to convey to you. One is, how does this from Cecilia from Chichi in Chile? How does this intention to practice equanimity relate to anger? And when anger comes up in the face of injustice, like part of the title of our conversation today is that we're living in a world that is on fire in so many levels. We are seeing climate catastrophe and authorities that are actually damaging even more the environment. We're seeing racism being in our face now, especially in the US, with all the awareness of the pain that has been caused for 400 years. So there is, it's reasonable to be angry. So how equanimity and anger dialogue or can support each other, or do they, I don't know, what's the relationship among them?
Yes, well, I think in a way you really spoke to that right before the question when we talked about how first we need to feel the anger. We really need to feel it. And in the context of the world right now, where expressions of anger are happening in response to injustice, and those expressions of anger sometimes serve society to actually wake it up. None of us will know exactly what elements of the cause and conditions up to George Floyd's murder in the United States and after have given rise to different societal changes that have happened in the US since George Floyd was murdered. Some people think that the expressions of anger, that the protests, even when they were violent, may have been part of getting people to wake up and change. We also don't know, whether these changes will hold, if we will go back and revert. We don't know what the future will be. And you and I had a conversation about this. It really gave me pause to think that at the very least, how I work with anger may not be the right way for other people to work with anger. So I really want to make this very clear that this is just one way,
Mm.
that the injustices that we're seeing in the world bring up a lot of anger.
Mm.
And I'm a white privileged woman, and I don't expect or even imagine that my anger feels the same as someone else's anger, and that what's right for me and the expression and how I work with that anger is right for somebody else.
Mm.
So that's the first, when we're talking about social injustice and situating this work in that context, I really want to say that first.
Mm.
And then I can speak personally and say that I think for myself, what I most want to do is to not waste one tiny drop of the energy of anger.
Mm.
I want to use it all and turn it in the direction of what matters to me in the world. And personally, that's compassion and
Mm.
kindness. And it's my own understanding of justice that I don't want to impose on anybody else.
Mm.
But in my mind, this process allows us to capture all the energy that's in every emotion: anger, fear,
Mm.
irritability, rage, despair. Capture it all
Mm.
and use it, transmute it. That equanimity, these practices, their job is actually to allow us to grab all of that life force and choose how we want to manifest it in the world. Have that be a conscious choice so that it's directed towards what's important to each of us.
Thank you for that. I haven't thought about it in that way, and I think it's so brilliant that equanimity could be the skill or the mindset that helps us take the best or take the energy that comes from difficult emotions, even to be able to reconnect with our values, to what we want to see. Because if anger is not accompanied by equanimity, probably I don't see complexity. I don't have any wisdom in my view. It's just black or white. The other is a non-human enemy, someone that just needs to be eliminated, just out of my sight or out of the world. And we lose the wisdom of anger, which is to remove obstacles or to set clear limits. But we need, for that to really to happen, we need to temper that blind energy and give it some wisdom without losing
Yeah.
the energy.
And there's another layer of that that's even more subtle that Shinzen talks about a lot that I think is interesting. I think that's absolutely, I agree 100% with what you said. And I think even the energy of anger, not only is it narrow
Mm.
and lacks wisdom and perspective. It's also very frenetic. And generally, we're most effective when our energy is flowing in a really kind of natural way. And angry energy is a very edgy, frenetic energy. And Shinzen also talks about, he uses a lot of metaphors with mechanical systems and impedance and resistance. So we're using equanimity to let our life energy flow as naturally as possible. This is not just for the benefit of the world, it's also for our benefit. And we haven't really talked about that side in our conversation, that when we're caught in a lot of anger, we're identified with it or suppressing it, we suffer. Not only do we not help the world, but we suffer. When our energy is either frenetic or our energy is muted and suppressed, we don't function well. We want to be a functioning system where the energy, like any organism or mechanical system in nature or created by man, functions best when the energy is flowing. And I have a quote here, just a short quote from Shinzen. Oh, I didn't plug in my computer, and I'm going to lose you in a minute if I don't.
Plug your computer. Don't be equanimous about that one.
Let me quickly plug it in.
Let it be attached.
Yeah, I'm attached now. So I just want to share this quote because I think it captures this idea really beautifully, from Shinzen Young, who says, the ultimate expression of meditation comes, I'm going to say it slowly, I probably don't need to from Maria Ho. The ultimate expression of meditation comes when we can feel all the pains of the world, experience them with mindfulness and equanimity, so they dissolve into energy, and then recolor that energy and radiate it out as unconditional love, moment by moment, through every pore of our being.
Wow. That's beautifully put.
Dissolving. So taking that energy, dissolving it like we do in compassion, and not wasting any of it, using it towards what matters.
Thank you for bringing that. Well, the time is running. I have the chat open here too, and there is a question that I'm finding really poignant because it's so sincere, and I think it applies to many people that can be watching this. So I'm going to translate the question. Let me see if I can find it here. So this is Maria Paz from Chile. She's asking, how can we develop equanimity when yourself, in your family history, in the family where you come from, you were mistreated, you were abused, you were abandoned, and now you see yourself replicating this with your children. You're being impulsive with them, you shout to them, you have immediate reactivity, and you know you're hurting them and that you're hurting yourself. How would you bring equanimity to that?
Well, that's speaking right to my heart. And first, it's Maria?
Yes, Maria Paz.
Maria Paz. So I have been exactly in that position many times. And I really understand from the depth of my being how that suffering feels. And one of the dangers is to impose an ideal of equanimity on top of the pain that the situation already has. So that's the first thing, is not to feel even worse because you think you should be equanimous in that moment. The second thing that's really important is there are different ways to interpret the suffering that we inherit genetically, epigenetically, through our families of origin. Even when you see yourself acting it out, the fact that you're seeing it means you're mindful of it. You aren't doomed because that happened to you in childhood. You're not doomed to a life of repeating it. It's not a life sentence. And I think it's important not to interpret it in that moment as extended into the future, that I am always going to have to be like this because that's what happened to me as a child. And the very fact that you're mindful of it means that you are breaking the cycle. Because that's the hardest part, is feeling the pain that you described in the moment, seeing yourself repeat what was done to you with all the love that you feel for your family, for yourself, for your child, even for your parents who abused you. That's the hardest. You've done the hardest work already. And so then, actually, I think, frankly, what's needed in that moment is not so much equanimity as forgiveness. You know, in that moment, really, that's what I need to do for myself in those moments of forgiving myself. You know, then I can recover again. Because otherwise, equanimity is putting this ideal on top, and it just doesn't work.
Thank you, Em, for saying that. I was taking that in and also bringing to mind many people that I love that will feel relief by what you just said, from the authority of experience and not from a certain place of knowing it all, but you're still cooking in this juice.
Boy. And that's I'm really in that question big time.
So we just have 2 minutes left. So can you say something about, and this also came up in the questions, is equanimity something that can be trained or practiced? Is it a result of other practices like mindfulness and compassion? And if you can say a few ideas about how to develop this quality.
Yes, it definitely can be trained, and I'm a big fan, and I teach it. You can do a formal practice of cultivating equanimity. You can do it informally, just like loving kindness and compassion. Those of you who are meditating already, you're already most likely cultivating equanimity because it's built in. So in compassion, loving kindness, like I said, when you practice with friend, foe, stranger, all beings, that's equanimity. In mindfulness, when you practice non-reactivity, non-grasping, painful experience comes, pleasant experience comes, that's equanimity. So many of you, I believe, who are listening into this call are already practicing equanimity. You already are, it's built in. And on top of that, you can practice it separately, you know, by working with the phrases and doing these specific reflections that involve remembering, bringing in perspective, wider view of impermanence, of non-identification, of time and space.
Thank you, Em. It's been beautiful to pick your brain and soul around equanimity. And yeah, the idea of this series of conversations is to open our mind to new ways of relating to our own experience, to others, and to the world in times of deep suffering. The idea is that we can use this opportunity to reimagine what we can be. So, thank you for being with us today and opening our minds in this beautiful direction, this spacious direction of equanimity.
Thank you, Gonzalo, for inviting me and for being such an important thought partner, heart and soul partner on this journey of cultivating compassion, and for creating such a beautiful and rich community of people I know and people I don't know, but already feel connected to, who care about the things that we care about. Um, I really wish everyone um, safety and health. I hope that these words will support you in being in these really difficult times we're in right now.
Thank you, and know that anyone that knows me knows you and love you already. So we're going to make it happen to bring you to South America and do some to keep being partners in crime in the South. So thank you again. I'm just going to invite our friends if they want to join for next week. I will be interviewing an activist, an ecologist from Chile who won the Alternative Nobel Peace Prize by defending the Patagonia and the Biobío River and now the Rio Maipo. And we're going to talk about our true biospheric and cosmic identity. That will be the theme. So espero que muchos de ustedes puedan unirse la próxima semana. Thank you, and thank you very much for being with us today and for your time, beautiful energy as always. I love you, my friend. Take good
Love
care.
you too.